you everybody for throwing the stuff in the chat. You'll see me looking at all sorts of different screens over here, but I'll try to keep track of the chat as much as possible. Looks like we got some international students out there. We got some people in some gap years, MDs, DOs, maybe some international people. That's fantastic. Got an Army HPSP. Thank you for your service, Matthew. Appreciate that. Let me jump in here. I'm going to just talk to you about who I am real quick. I won't bother you with too much of my background, but yeah, I wear a lot of different hats. So in my civilian life, I'm a family physician. In my reserve work for the Army, I'm a flight surgeon. So I served on active duty for 7 years, then in the reserves for 4 years now. I did work in an advising position when I was at UC Irvine on their selection committee for 4 years, 2 years of residency admissions experience. And I've been doing this professionally for the past 8 years. So wear a lot of different hats, and hopefully I can lend you some decent experience here today. What we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through we're going to kind of broadly overview the whole residency application process. And I'd like to generate some conversation here. I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of slides. You guys probably get plenty of that on your own time. So what I'll do is I'm going to show you some stuff. I'm going to talk to you about some things, and we'll open it up at the end for questions. But let's start off by just talking about how you choose a specialty. So some of you, this may be new news, old news, not relevant, but just kind of take a look at it with me as we go along. So the first place we're starting is when you're thinking about residency. If you're a medical student looking forward to residency, I'm going to give you some general things to think about how to kind of pick where to go. And no one of these positions is going to be the sole guiding force. But start by just taking a look at the screen and look at the length of training that you're going to go into. And maybe you love neurosurgery, and the idea of 7 years in training doesn't bother you at all. But for some people that makes a big difference for whatever reason. So my wife, for example, she was in love with surgery, but didn't love the idea of being a surgical resident for 4 or 5 years. And so, yeah, just kind of find the specialty you're kind of interested in there. Just make sure you've got a good idea how long that training plan is going to be. At the end of the day, there's lots of factors that go into your length of training, depending on the culture of the residency. 3 to 5 years may sound quite daunting. The pay for a resident is not a ton. So if you got debt to pay back, that does play into this as well too. Let's talk about physician compensation. And so I wouldn't recommend making any major life decision on money alone, but you probably got a good idea of where you're going to fall into the spectrum here. So take a look at those plastic surgeons way at the top, making the big bucks. There's me. Hey, I'm fourth from the bottom, not doing too bad with family medicine. So, you're not going to choose your specialty just out of how much money you're going to make, but you should probably have a good idea of where you're going to fall out. So take a look, find your specialty of choice up there. Orthopedic still doing well at second to the top up there, which is pretty awesome. Take a look at dermatology. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down there. I'm going to reference dermatology a lot during this talk. One, because they get paid a lot. And two, they're a pretty stark difference from family medicine. And here's the first place we can see that difference. And we're going to kind of reference derm back and forth with family medicine for a lot of these things. So, finding a balance as a physician can be particularly challenging. What I love about this very simple graph or image that I made here is that, this implies that both sides are equally balanced. And that doesn't just not perfectly possible, right? I mean, if you're spending 40 to 60 hours at work every day and the rest is left over for your personal time, that's not exactly perfect equality there, but you can tip the scale either way depending on the specialty that you choose. And so think about some of the things on here. It's not just the actual practice of the medicine. It's the admin that comes along with it, the charting and all those things. Consider, a surgeon that has typically a PA attached to them that helps a lot about with the administrative burden while they can kind of focus more on the technical work. Compare that to family medicine where you're stuck with mounds and mounds of charts. So I don't know if you guys follow Dr. Glaucom Flecken, but he does some pretty good impressions of family medicine, kind of overworked with some paperwork. Think about on call. Okay, is a pager something you want to carry around all the time? Do you want to be on call? Do you find that exciting, or do you find the idea of being pulled away from your family at any hour kind of troublesome. To me, this was an easy decision to make pretty quick as I entered the hospital, is that I would like a nice quiet office where I'm not attached with this device on my hip calling me back. For some people, that's a big excitement. A good example of that is, surgery versus OBGYN. Maybe if you're just practicing obstetrics, your day-to-day life in the clinic doesn't involve a ton of, on-call work. But shoot, if you're delivering patients, you're going to get called at any odd hour of the night. Think about the practice location that you want to be. This picture on the left, actually, that's a little rural clinic. I actually worked at that clinic. It was an old house converted into a clinic. That was my first job out of the Army, actually. So if a nice, quiet, little quaint clinic sounds good to you, well then, maybe you don't want to be a neurosurgeon. Or maybe you like the idea of a big, bustling metropolitan center. And you can do those with multiple specialties too. Don't get me wrong, you can work as a rural surgeon too, but kind of get an idea of which way you're kind of driving your career and what kind of places you want to be. Okay, so let's leave it at that. Hopefully that stimulates some discussion for you guys to start thinking about career choice and what specialty means, what the training is involved, the pay, and all that stuff. We're going to jump right into actually kind of the nuts and bolts of applying to residency. And I'm going to walk you through a lot of data. Don't feel like you got to memorize anything. I just want to kind of give you a rough idea of what we're talking about here. So bottom line up front, there's no tricks, there's no gimmicks, there's no nothing with applying to residency. It's just like applying to medical school. Now, historically, it was step one that was the driving numerical factor of getting into residency. So just like in medical school, getting into medical school was primarily driven by GPA and MCAT. It's board scores. And recently, if you're tracking everything, step one has gone away. COMLEX step one is a pass-fail now. And so the emphasis numerically is now directly shifted onto USMLE COMLEX step two, okay? This is by design, so it's not an accident. There's a whole long webinar I could give you about why those changes actually took place and how they're both good and bad. But in any case, there are other factors that come into play with your application, but you're going to see, I'm going to show you some images of just, how important that score is. The rest of the things you see on here, we're going to touch base with those. But just like when you were a pre-med applying to medical school, kind of, the AMCAS pieces there that were, your work activities section, which is made up of a lot of these, they're going to come to play too. They do play a role. I'll show you just how much they play a role depending on what specialty you're looking at. So here's the first of many busy charts here. I want to draw your attention to dermatology, which is third from the left there on the bottom. And then a couple more over, you see family medicine, and we're going to use those to go back and forth. This is a graph for statistics that come out of something called Charting Outcomes in the Match. It's published by the NRMP every single year, and this is our Bible as advisors for residency. Now, it's a massive document. It's over 200 pages. You can sort through this on your own. There's lots of data. People like me kind of live and breathe this document. So I'm going to go a little faster through it and just kind of point you in the right direction. But you can go on Google, check out Charting Outcomes in the Match, go to MD, DO, or International Medical Graduate, depending on who you are. But I'll walk you through kind of how to use this data. Okay, it's very, very important. So take a look at dermatology right there, 71% match rate for MD seniors. And take a look at family medicine over there, hanging out at 97.9, just about as high as it gets. Two things I want to draw your attention to. Number one, you see the ceiling of this graph, pretty darn high, okay? MD graduates across the country do exceedingly well in the match. You can see that bar is pretty high. For most of it, we're talking 80s, 90s, and then the more competitive specialties are dipping a little further. So this is your first introduction to show you that, and maybe this is a big duh for you, is that dermatology is by nature much more competitive than family medicine. More people are applying, and well, the ratio between more people applying, less people getting in for dermatology. So this is your beginning place to just look at, hey, if you're an MD, look, how competitive are these specialties? So take a glance at that. Now I'm going to jump back and forth on some of these, but I want you to take a look. Here's your DOs, okay? So all you DOs out there, I'm going to just switch back and forth real quick just so you can see how that ceiling changes, okay? High ceiling, relatively low ceiling, high ceiling, low ceiling, okay? So still for a lot of specialties, that match rate is very high in the high 90s. But look at dermatology, went from those 70s down to the 50s. And so for some of your more competitive specialties, your surgical subspecialties, and dermatology as an example, just the last two letters behind your name are going to play a role. Does it mean that as a DO you can't get into dermatology? Absolutely not. Okay. These are just statistics, and this is one of those statistics, but it should help you kind of know what playing field you're in. Now, for the IMGs out there, the international medical graduates, I don't know why they decided to make it these wild colors, but in any case, that ceiling drops significantly. If you're an IMG out there, you've got an uphill battle, I'm sorry to say, is that just matching into any given specialty is significantly harder as an IMG. So I'm going to draw your attention over to family medicine. You used to see for MDs and DOs high 90s approaching nearly 100% match rate. Even for family medicine, that's dipping down to about 58 for the US IMGs. That's if you're a US citizen training outside of the country, or for the non-US IMGs. So no matter where you train or went to school, if you're not a citizen, you fall into that group. Those statistics are significantly challenged. Go look at dermatology over there, okay? You see there's an absent column for US IMGs. And so you need to know, which pool you fall into here, MD, DO, IMG, and what you're getting yourself into. So then if you ask that same question, if I'm at a US IMG, can I match into dermatology? Well, there's more data to say this, but I would say it's not looking good for you. There's a lot more nuance to kind of explore. So if you're a person out there like that, don't look at this graph and say, I'm done, I'll never be a dermatologist. There's a lot more nuance to help you out with. And, people like us, advisors, can kind of steer you in the right direction with a little bit more time. But I think it's a good idea. Just look at the graph, see where you're at. By the way, I get tired of looking at myself talking. So please, throw some questions in the chat as we go. Comments are good too. I'll kind of take some time to glance back there and look at the chat as well, but we'll definitely come back to it at the end. But if you see something on here, you got a question or any kind of comment, throw it in the chat. I'll kind of look back and forth and see where we're at, okay? Okay, let's talk about fill ratio. Okay, so those are kind of just standards for what pool you fall into. This is another busy chart. I know there are a lot of busy pages here. Again, dermatology, third from the top. Family medicine is 3 more down from there. I want to draw your attention to column number 3, okay? Column number 3 is the fill ratio. And this tells you basically how many applicants or get into these programs over how many applicants apply, okay? The closer that number is to 1 makes the kind of easier specialty to get into, because there's roughly 1 applicant for every spot. The farther you deviate from that number, it becomes more competitive. So take a look at dermatology, 1.53. There's roughly 1.5 people for every 1 spot, okay? Look down there at family medicine, and that number is 1.03. So very, very close to essentially 1 spot for every applicant. Now, this is not the be-all, end-all, okay? So this does tell you something to do with competitiveness based on just how many people are applying, but you might go all the way down there and take a look at radiation oncology, 0.88. There's actually less applicants than there are for slots. Does that mean that radiation oncology is super easy to get into? No, it's still a very competitive specialty for other reasons, but it just kind of gives you an idea for how many positions out there and how many people are you competing with. All right, more stuff. Let's take a look at step scores. If you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, hey, let me know in the chat. But let's take a look at those step 2 scores. And we're so basically looking at different measures where you can get an idea of how competitive and challenging your specialty is. Thank you, Christina, for some feedback. Appreciate it. I love that you love data. I don't know if I do, but I can definitely work with it. So, okay, dermatology, 3rd from the left down there, okay? Check out just how high that bar is for your step score. It's almost at the very top. There's not much higher than dermatology. It's pretty darn close with plastic surgery way over there to the right. But yeah, derm is way up there, almost the highest board score that you need. Hey, Samuel, I will get to that question in just a moment. Thank you. Dermatology is just about the highest score you need to get into any given specialty. Now take a look at family medicine a little bit over there, 3 over to the right. That average that was step 2 was roughly about 260 for people getting into dermatology. That number is roughly about 240 on there. Okay, so based on this is a good idea to get an idea of what score you need to get to be competitive for any given specialty. And so that's for planning purposes for how you study. Although I wouldn't target a very specific score like, I'm going to go into family medicine, so I don't have to work that hard on my step 2. You should still compete to the best of your ability and really go for it. But if you already have your step 2 score, this is really helpful knowledge to know, hey, what you're kind of eligible for, so to speak. So let me pause there on step 2 score. Let me check out this question from Samuel in here. He said, for the past slide, why would there be no bar for the US IMGs, but yes for non-US IMGs? There is more data to pull up to go back and forth for the US IMGs versus MDs and DOs. So I'm just giving you kind of a snippet for some of these, but just know there are way more graphs and data out of there. Deepak is asking, what makes otolaryngology so competitive? It seems like it is very similar to derm. I am not an ENT, but I can tell you a couple of things. One, they make a ton of money. 2, it's a pretty fun job to do and pretty impressive kind of training to do head and neck surgery. So they get paid a lot. It's a long training, and so it takes a lot of work to kind of get there. It's generally considered something that's a relatively good lifestyle in the world of surgery. So good question. We got a question here from Anmol. Sorry if I botched your name. How do we choose a specialty that is a good fit for us and craft your application well when step 2 is taken, most often in your third year medical school? How do you choose a specialty? Great question. I went over some slides at the very beginning that should give you some good questions to ask yourself on some of those. So hopefully you saw some of those. We can always circle back to that at the end too. So let's keep cruising on some of this data, okay? Now we're going to drill down here a little bit, okay? So that last slide just gives you an idea of what is the rough score you need, average, okay? Now let's find out what happens with the actual scores you're coming to the table with. And we're going to start with family medicine here, okay? So take a look at the step 2 CK score graph here, and you'll notice a couple things. Number 1, people get in a lot, right? I mean, look at all that blue, dark blue match data, okay? So MD seniors, and you remember this 97.9 match rate, they're getting in almost no matter what score they have. Now there's a kind of a bell-shaped curve here around 231 to 240. That's that sweet spot. Now beyond that, it doesn't seem to help you if you have a 260 versus a 230. But certainly as you go from 200 to 230, you are increasing your chances. But overall, you're going to do pretty good if you pass here, okay? Let's use that to compare with dermatology. Pretty different shape here, right? Gradually increasing. Pretty much the better you do on step 2, the better your chance of matching. It's pretty straightforward here. And you can see, I don't remember my math here, but that's kind of exponentially rising there, right? So it's not just kind of a linear progression, but the difference between, a 211 for dermatology and a 260 plus is dramatic, okay? So this is a really helpful type of graph when you have your step 2 score to then go and see, okay, I know what the average is for people, but really what does my score mean for me, okay? Now, another thing to notice about this, and this is a good introduction to more data we're going to drill down on, is, okay, what is it how come 26 people with a 231 got in? What did those people do? Or even look at, even down at 211 to 220, even though the ratio there is 3 people got in and 4 people didn't, so your odds are pretty bad, they're against your favor. I mean, still 3 people with a 211 to 220 matched to dermatology. The answer to that question is going to be in more slides, more data. So let's jump to that. Okay, let me pause before I jump into some of this other stuff, hit a couple of questions in here. Someone's asking, how are your chances affected by having 2 attempts on step 1? Let's circle back to that at the end, okay? What about scores for internal medicine? You are most welcome to take a look at these slides and kind of find whatever specialty you're kind of interested in. I'm going to mostly be talking about family med and derm, mostly because they provide a very good left and right limit for differences in data and how these affect you. But if you want to jump on charting outcomes in the match, take a look at your own specialty of interest. certainly you can jump on that for that. People like us as advisors can definitely help you deal with your specific situation as well in greater detail. Okay, so I ended that last slide with telling you basically, there are other factors here, right? Those people with low board scores are still getting into competitive specialties, not at a very high rate, but they're getting in. So what are they doing? And the answer is the stuff that is not your board scores, okay? So take a look here. We got just a broad overview of what publications do for you in different specialties, okay? Derm, pretty high outlier there. You need a lot of research there. Family medicine, you don't. In fact, a lot of these things, there's not a ton of research involved here. But again, you need to drill down into the specifics here. So let's take a look at some of that drill down data. Here's family medicine. Okay, let me just switch back there real quick. Doesn't look like between matching and not matching, there's a big difference here. 4.1 versus 2.6 is a ratio there. Not a big difference. But let's see what that actually means. This graph doesn't really follow any pattern, okay? Whether you had no research, okay, 6 people didn't get in, maybe that's an outlier, maybe it's not, but just look across the board. Whether you've got a lot of research or almost none doesn't have a significant impact on your ability to match, right? Look at those people with none, 189 matched and 6 didn't. So you can look at this drill down data and say, look, for family medicine, even though the average was 4.6 for people that match, it doesn't really matter what you've got. So this is really helpful for the applicant that comes to me and says, shoot, I got no research. What does that mean for me? I can tell you exactly what that means for you, okay? Let's compare that to derm. Different, right? Much, much different. If you've got none, your chances of getting in extraordinarily low. You need a ton of research to get into dermatology, 5 or more in terms of abstracts, presentations, and publications. So again, we're talking about how different these are in terms of competitiveness and what it actually takes to get into these, okay? Okay, so there's a pretty 30,000-foot view of kind of the nuts and bolts of the match process in terms of what it takes in to get into different specialties and some different data to look there. Again, there are dozens and dozens of these charts and data pools for every given specialty. You can access that data on your own through the NRMP. Working with an advisor like us is a fantastic way to kind of drill down on some of the nuances of your particular situation. So that's more of a subjective kind of response in terms of experience. But we can also help you work through the data. It can be a little bit overwhelming. So before I jump into the actual application process, quick check on time, 5:25. We're doing pretty good. Sorry, that's mountain time for me. Let's see what we got for questions. So someone asked, why is HEMONC not on these slides? Is it coupled with radiation oncology? Good question. I don't know specifically. You'll find that the subspecialties of internal medicine, so hematology as an example, not all of them are on that main match data. There's other slides that deal with certain fellowship data. Good question. What type of clinical experience is required for IMGs? We should definitely talk a little bit about IMGs at the end. Thank you. And then next question is, what should we do to stand out on med school apps? Good question. And thanks for reading into where we're going. That's exactly what I'm talking about right now. So let's hit up exactly what's going to go on in your application. The good news up front, this is not the AMCAS, AA Commerce, or TMDSAS, or whatever you use to get into medical school. ARAS, which is the Electronic Residency Application Service, much, much simpler. Okay, so it's just not going to take as much time and logistical work as you did with AMCAS, okay? Once you get a token to that, your school will provide this for you when you get closer in your 4th year towards applying to the match. Here's some broad tips for you, okay? You want to start this thing early, okay? Unlike in your pre-med days, there's no rolling admissions here, okay? So whether you finish your application on June 30th or in October, it doesn't have a meaningful or any meaningful impact on your ability to match as long as you're still within some time periods. And I won't get into that entirely, but basically there's an opening of the application and when the application is actually released to programs. If you're anywhere in that window, it doesn't matter. But remember this is that your clinical schedule in 4th year can be highly unpredictable. You might have lots of time to work on it and you might have no time. So start this thing early. As soon as your school gives you access, go in and start working on it and chip away at it, because you just don't know what your schedule is going to look like. Okay. The experience section, so just like the work activities that you worked on as a pre-med for medical school applications, it's very, very similar here. And a lot of people ask, well, how do I set myself apart from everybody else applying during this process? My recommendation for that is to use paragraph form, which is conducive for providing reflection. So don't just bullet point and tell me what you did in any given activity. Tell me the activity, roughly, I usually say 3/4 of description. So tell me what you did. 1/4 should be spent on reflection. Tell me why that's important to you. Tell me why that's important to me as the reader of your application. Okay, that's a great way to help set yourself apart. Last thing to know, personal statement, massive character limit. Don't go that far. Okay, I have seen some people try. It comes out to like 5 or 6 pages. This should be just like your personal statement for medical school. So think a page and a half, maybe for extenuating circumstances. Some IMGs I work with a little bit of a non-traditional pathway, maybe up to 2 pages for the personal statement. But shoot for about a page and a half. Okay, that's roughly 4,800, 5,000 characters, which should be a familiar type of essay that you wrote back for your personal statement. Okay. Quick note for myself down here was that the supplemental application is gone now. Eris keeps changing every year. Stay tuned. Eris has a Twitter feed and all sorts of things that will keep you up to date as you get closer as well too. Okay, here's something that you may not know. This was not something that you encountered when you applied to medical school, and that's signaling and geographic preferences. The take home I want you to remember for this is that I just don't want you to lose any sleep on this, okay? There's no kind of tricks. It's just straightforward. If you're from the West Coast and that's where you plan to go ahead and signal a geographic preference for the West Coast. If you like the style and the culture of kind of medical practice and training on the East Coast, go ahead and signal East Coast. But don't think you got to play any tricks here. It's really just straightforward, okay? Same thing with signaling. This is your ability to actually tell a program, I'm applying to all these programs, but I'm really interested in you. And this is something new that came up around COVID, is essentially people used to apply to way fewer residencies. But now that a lot of stuff is done virtually, people apply to way more. And so this is your ability to just tell a program, I'm interested in you. And so again, don't lose sleep over it. It's super basic. This is very straightforward. There's no tricks here, okay? Don't try to read into and think, what do they want me to write here? Okay, pause for questions again, and then we're going to talk about the interview. We've got some questions on here. Is research quantity or quality more important for matching? Good question. Hopefully you got a good answer from that from my Durham slide, right? You need X amount of research projects, publications, abstracts in order to be eligible for some specialties, depending on which one you're looking at. Durham as an example. So will 2 really good research projects do the trick? Probably not, at least not statistically speaking. That may change depending on your board scores and other factors, but you really just need to flood them with a lot of work for that. It's very important. Another question here, when can you begin the application process? This happens sometime around the beginning of June. You want to ask your med school about this, but they basically release some pieces and information along the way to kind of keep you posted on this. Let's see what else we got. Gen Surge, we'll come back to that one. Somebody asked some questions in here for Eris. Jesse, thank you so much for keeping track of these. They're getting a little fast for me. So I'm going to come back to these at the end. Let's wrap up the PowerPoint stuff here. I see the Q&A stuff getting some hits in there too. Let's talk about the interview process. I won't take a ton of your time on this one because it's pretty straightforward and you should have been through this with the med school process already, okay? Do's and don'ts here, okay? Dress professionally. If you're going to be virtual, a lot of people talk about putting like a conversation piece in your background. Don't do that. Don't fall for any kind of the gimmicks or the stuff you see online for this. The guiding principle here is that for an interview, whether it's in person or virtual, all the attention of the interviewer should be on you. So don't have anything distract from you and your message. Don't wear some crazy hairdo. Don't wear some crazy jewelry or anything like that. Try to dress kind of in neutral tones as well. You don't want the interviewer distracted on your appearance your background, any of that. It should be just on your delivery, okay? If your interview is online, it's a good idea to practice your setup, okay? Go online, buy like a $10 ring light. Mine actually broke like a couple days ago, so my lighting is not ideal. A simple ring light makes a big difference for your lighting and your appearance. Practice the setup. You should have your screen roughly at eye level. Sometimes people will put it a little bit higher as you look up. It makes you look a little bit more attentive. If you're looking down, you tend to look a little bit sleepy. You can find some tips on YouTube and stuff like that. But yeah, get your setup ready, practice, rehearse, make sure you're ready to go before you get into the real deal. Okay, what does that interview look like? Whether it's going to be in person or virtual, you're probably going to meet with the program director and or the assistant program director, so basically the head honcho here. You'll probably meet with some residents as well too. The weight of all of them is the same, okay? So don't get caught off guard. This is just like interviewing for medical school. Make sure you're putting just as much energy, effort, and professionalism into the student interview or the resident interview as you are for the program director and the assistant program director. Everything counts, okay? And the best thing I can give you for advice in terms of interviews is you must practice, okay? It's great if you can practice with a professional like myself, but please practice in the mirror, practice with a video, practice with a friend or a family member. Get some practice kind of just going through some questions and getting comfortable with, the various answers. If you've got red flags on your application, practice delivering these. A lot of people ask me, well, if I rehearse too much, will it come off canned? And the answer is, yeah, you're going to have to uncan it. But that's going to happen with anything. After your second or third interview, stuff is going to sound pretty kind of rote to you anyways. So whether you're practicing and having to uncan your answers yourself, or you're going through the interview process, you still got to go through that process anyways of kind of uncanning here. So practice, write down your answers, get comfortable with the message you're delivering, and go for it. The one thing I'll say more too about staying calm and poised, I think it's really helpful to recognize that you are going to be nervous. You are going to be anxious. It's a big deal interview. You spend a lot of time trying to get here. It's okay to be anxious. If you try to tell yourself to calm down, you're probably just going to get more anxious, okay? So get comfortable with the anxiety, get comfortable with that. Don't try to talk yourself out of it. Most people will calm down within the first 1 or 2 minutes. Know that's going to happen. That's a really helpful way to practice with a professional. We will identify how long it's taking you to get to that comfortable level and try to get you to settle in quicker. Okay. All right, that's it. That's all I got for you for the PowerPoint slides here. And so please feel free, keep chipping away at the questions here. Hey, Jesse, if you want to just hit me through the chat and maybe identify some questions out of the Q&A, I'll pull that open as well too. But if there's some stuff that you saw in there that we should hit, let me know.
Absolutely.
Draw it up here too.
Yep. So these might kind of backtrack back to the the beginning of your presentation. But Adam asked, what are the best ways to prepare for a competitive residency early in your med school journey?
Yeah, doesn't it? It kind of sucks that, your step 2 score makes such a big impact on your ability to match into any given specialty. And that doesn't happen until way late into your clinical years. So your life kind of becomes predetermined early on, which is an unfortunate and kind of an unfair principle of how we get through this process. But in any case, the answer is you should be planning to apply into the most competitive specialty. So everybody on this webinar should in their head be applying to dermatology, okay? You want the highest board scores. You want plenty of research activity. You want volunteer experience, leadership experience. You want all of this stuff, okay? That way, if you end up as a family med like me, you're going to be a really competitive applicant. And if you end up in dermatology or plastics or something real competitive, well, you'll be right on par.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is, would you recommend disclosing any disabilities? For example, this student needs to use a walker or a wheelchair because of chronic back pain. They're worried that sharing this with the program directors will automatically disqualify them out of the residency search.
Good question. No. So you're covered by the same kind of ADA principles that you'll find in any employment. And there's actually specific, portions of your application where you can identify this. So you don't need to go into any, further detail if you don't want to. If you do want to make that part of your application, personal statement would be a good spot, but there are boxes to check in ERIS for that. Good question.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question we have is, how does one get an away rotation?
An away rotation, good question. So we do that a lot for some of our clients at MedSchoolCoach. So VSAS, I think is what it's called. I don't remember what that stands for, but visiting students something. But every school has a system that kind of links into other schools here. And so if you want to do an away rotation, which is extremely beneficial, okay, especially if you say, look, I want to go to, I don't know, X program in X city. If you can get yourself an away rotation, we call that a working interview. This is the best chance you'll get at getting a spot, both for an interview and matching that program. Because unlike every other applicant out there, you know them personally and they know you. Now, you also want to perform really well on that rotation. So don't go do your first internal medicine residency at your top program, right? Do your core residency, or sorry, your core rotations first, and then maybe go do a sub-I there. So that way you've got some clinical skills built in there. You don't want to show up there as the fresh new third year.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question kind of revolves around, if you're not coming from a prestigious med school, does it really matter in your residency application?
I love that question. Now, I didn't show you all the data in the NRMP stuff, but guess what? There's not a single darn piece of data that asks what school you came from. It does not matter at all, okay? All we care about is performance, okay? So if you went to a little old school in Alabama and you did great there, you're gonna do awesome, okay? If you went to Yale and you did poorly, too bad, okay? So you don't get any kudos for going to the Ivy League. So yeah, the cool thing about this is as you progress in your medical training in your career, this is kind of an overstatement, but nobody cares where you went to medical school when you're getting into residency. Nobody cares where you went to your residency when you're in fellowship. That stuff just disappears. All that people care about is your patients care about how good of a physician you are. Your employer cares about the skills, your personality, that stuff. Now, clearly, I mean, there's that's an overstatement, but the guiding principle is that the answer to that question is no. The prestige of your school doesn't matter.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question we have is, could you explain if or if not a gap year for personal reasons, does that affect your chances of getting into residency or the specialty?
Yeah, not necessarily. Now, usually that gap year comes with something significant that happened to you, and that's it needs to be explained, okay? Because it's not, I don't want to say abnormal, okay? It's not common, but it happens to people, right? And you're not alone if that happened to you. It deserves careful explanation. It deserves context, but just having the gap year or some time off doesn't necessarily impact you. But usually it's kind of paired with a lot of people will take time off because maybe they failed a board, so they had to kind of get more time to take care of that. So it depends on your situation, but it doesn't necessarily hurt you. It does need very careful wording in your application.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. Kind of on the same lines as that, is there any point during a residency interview where it's appropriate to ask for certain protections that a program offers, such as maternity or paternity leave, protected time off, anything like that?
What a good question. It sucks that you have to ask this question, and that speaks to a larger problem with medical culture and all that stuff. You want to kind of walk on some eggshells here, okay? Is that, this is a great question, especially for female applicants, is that they're asking, look, maybe I'm going to have a baby during residency. And if I ask that question, are they going to reject me for that? What do they think about me? That's a really hard question to answer. And on the one hand, I would hope that fellow medical professionals like myself would be a bit more open-minded about this. It is really dependent on the specific program you're talking to. You're going to have to feel out some of the personal stuff about that. It's probably not something that you want to lead with in the interview. And I know that sucks, and I wish it wasn't the case. But my kind of guiding principle, if one of my clients asked me this, I'd say, just hold off on it for now. That's something you want to explore later. Any information you can kind of gather from fellow residents, kind of off the books or on the website might be helpful, but probably not something you want to discuss with at the interview.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is regarding letters of recommendations. What is the best way to acquire a strong letter of rec during electives if we weren't able to get good ones from core rotations?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you need to have letters from your specialty, but not all of your letters need to come from there. This is particularly true in primary care, okay? Is that, for a family medicine person, I want to see some family medicine letters. I want to see what family docs think about you, but I'm also really curious about what other people think about you too. This is not necessarily true of like plastic surgery, right? The plastic surgery team probably doesn't care that much about what the family medicine doctor had to say about you. That being said, if you've got a great letter a great letter is a great letter. And the right letter writer is the person that knows you the best. Okay. So you kind of have to check a couple boxes here. If you're applying to derm, please get derm letters. Okay. But if you've got a great, letter writer from another specialty, if they know you well, it can be incredibly impactful.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is, what are some good questions to ask during the interview to leave a good impression and to show genuine interest?
Yeah, good question. I'll give you some rules of thumb. So I won't tell you the questions to ask, but I'll tell you how to develop them. Okay. Number one, don't ask a question that doesn't have any practical implication on your decision. Okay. So a good example of this might be how many ultrasound machines do you have in your residency program? I mean, it's a question, right? There's no bad questions or dumb questions. But if they have 3 or 2 or 1 or even none, would it really make that big of a difference? Maybe if you're an ER doctor, maybe, but that's maybe a red flag for the program. But keep that in mind. Number 2, don't ask a question that the interviewer doesn't know the answer to. Nobody likes to look stupid, okay? So, don't ask one of the residents what the average kind of step 3 score is, okay? They're just not going to know the answer to that, and that just kind of makes them feel not great. Number 3, don't ask a question that you can easily find on the website, okay? So don't ask about like how many people go on to academic medicine versus community medicine. You can probably find that on the website. So there's more I can give you, but there's kind of a couple of rules of thumb for developing what not to ask. And you can flip those to say, ask questions that have a really meaningful impact on your ability to make a decision, right? That shows genuine passion and interest. Ask questions that are relevant to the person themselves. It means you're paying attention to the conversation, and that's more of a conversation that you can develop. So you can use those to help push you in the right direction.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is from Justin. Justin says, I knew about signaling, but it sounds like you said that we can also choose a preference for location. Is that correct? If so, what is the granularity?
Yeah, the granularity, in my opinion, is none. But I mean, you do have 2 separate things. There's geographic signaling preferences and there are program preferences. They are separate. One is to basically tell a program, I really like you, you're one of my top picks. The other one is to just roughly tell me, and I guess that is maybe the answer to your granular question. One is very precise, the program itself. One is the general area. So they're both relevant, but kind of different in that sense.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is, how are your chances affected of matching into a specialty by having 2 attempts on a step 1? Can this be disregarded with a step 2 score higher than 230?
So for multiple attempts, well, the good news is, okay, so if you don't have a number for step 1, it's just pass fail. So it is going to show up that you had multiple attempts on there. It's not the best thing in the world, but at least in the pass-fail world, you can't tell the difference between a fail and a low score 2. Ultimately, the step 2 score means more to the programs. You're still going to have to explain this in your personal statement. So don't think excuses, think context, okay? Everybody's situation is different. Nobody went into medical school to do awesome on standardized tests. So use that to your advantage. You can spin that a little bit, or maybe not even spin, but just provide the honest context behind that situation. The higher the kind of, or the more competitive the specialty, the more it's going to matter. So places like primary care are going to look a little bit less stringent on that. Dermatology may look a little bit more closely at it. But again, everything is nuanced, right? Maybe you can flex a little stronger piece of your application and compensate for it.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is, if our school lacks a home program for the desired specialty, does that hurt our chances?
Not necessarily. I mean, it would be great if you had it, but that's where VSAS comes into play as well too. So go find a program that you can get some more experience, like a local opportunity. If you don't, if your school is relatively new, you don't have those partnerships, go find one and ask. Guess how all those connections got made? It's people like you going out there and making them. So yeah, take a step forward, build it on your own. I did that in residency for some stuff. You can do it in medical school as well too.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is regarding shelf exams. Do programs care if we were unable to pass shelf exams the first time, but we did okay on step 2?
Yeah, if any program director is looking at step or the shelves, I would be surprised, and also I would think they're kind of strange. But no, I mean the shelf stuff won't impact you. Now the shelf stuff may impact your grades if you have grades at your school. It may impact your ranking at the school. Those may come into play, but the shelves on their own are not going to be something discreetly looked at.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is, how much does our score ranking during the first 2 years of medical school impact our residency matching?
Yeah, another piece of data that doesn't exist on NRMP, which is my way of objectively saying nobody cares that much. It depends on how it's worded on your dean's letter, but just broadly speaking, it probably has some correlation elsewhere. So your ranking may correspond with some problem areas. If you're in the bottom 25%, maybe your scores aren't so good. So that does maybe point to some other issue that may make you less competitive, but the ranking in itself doesn't correlate with that.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is regarding the ARIS application. What's the best way to list your experiences given that you're only limited to 15 spots?
Yep, you want to pick things that are relevant in terms of time. So don't reach back to like pre-med stuff if it's not super relevant. Now, maybe you had a really important research project you did in college. I did, and I put that on my application. Maybe that's not going to fly so much with plastics and derm. But so if there is something really important from before, in other examples, I used to be a teacher before I went to medical school. I pulled that out. That's relevant to my application. But choose things for the most part that are just medical school alone, and then go look at your specialty too, right? If it's derm, then maybe you're going to push more research, abstract stuff like that and fill that category up rather than something like the community service piece. Maybe if you're family medicine, because research doesn't matter as much, you may pump up the community service. So you may have to kind of bend and flex these depending on your own unique situation.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next couple questions are back to letters of rec. So in terms of letters of recommendation, what distinguishes a strong letter of rec from an excellent letter of rec? And then how many should we submit on the ARIS application?
Yeah, you want at least 3. Okay. Anything more than that is icing on the cake. 3 letters. Anything beyond 5, personally, I think is just way too many and just too much for somebody to read. If they're really, really exceptional letters, maybe your particular situation more than 5 would be okay. But think 3 to 5. What distinguishes letters? I'll tell you, 90, maybe 95% of letters all look the same. It's a big block of text about who the person is. I'm Dr. So-and-so, and this is all the great things I did. And then there's a little, piece at the bottom is like, Joey was a 3rd-year medical student and did really good in his rotations. That is okay. I mean, that's what a lot of people write. But what it does show me is you don't know that person that well. It's really easy to just spot by opening up the letter how strong that letter is. And so if I don't see that standard format, somebody really took the time to write a letter personally for you. Even the format is going to tell me what kind of letter I'm looking at. And we all know this as letter writers. I wrote a letter for somebody just earlier this year, and I sat down and I worked on it because I loved this guy. He was such a great applicant. And so we can see that because we write those letters. So focus on people that really, really know you well. Spend time getting to know the people that you want your letters to come from.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The next question is in terms of research publication and presentations. How are students getting such high numbers of research publications and presentations? Do they perform research during their rotation years and summer years in addition to their preclinical years? And do you have any advice on how to participate in publications?
Yeah, good question. I love just where you're going with it. Like, how are these people doing this? I was just thinking in my head, like, I don't know, they're just probably never sleeping, eating, or exercising. But no, I mean, there's fantastic people that get a lot of this done. You got to start early, right? If you know that you're interested in something like derm, you need to be working from day one on this. So you need to be going out and looking for opportunities. You need to be talking with your professors. You need to be talking with the residents, the chief residents, the fellows, the attendings, asking, looking for this stuff. It will not fall in your lap, especially for research work. Now, what I will tell you, and I can speak to this as from an attending, so I'm a professor for clinical instruction at the University of Colorado. I've got lots of stuff I would love to write up, but I'm way too busy. And so if somebody comes and asks me, I'm like, great, yeah, here's those 3 things I was looking for. So don't be shy about asking. If they don't have anything, they'll tell you. But there's lots and lots of people like me that just don't have the time. So we're looking for people like you, but you got to go out there and get it.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. We only have a couple minutes left, so I'm just going to pass 2 or 3 more questions to you. The next
Great.
one is, if you intend to go into fellowship, is it better to aim for a residency program with fellowship programs versus choosing to go to a residency program without fellows to be able to get more versatile experience?
Okay, I misunderstood it first, but I got you. Basically, you're looking, does the institution actually have that structure there? I mean, yeah, yes and no. Now, just like now, this is a whole separate webinar about fellowship, is that just like there's things to do for a pre-med to get into medical school, and there's things for a medical student to get into residency, there are things for a resident to do to get into fellowship. Being in an institution with those fellows is not necessarily one of them, but I mean, it will impact the ability of experience you get in that, and your comfort level with it, and maybe some of the procedures that you're able to gather during residency. So look, I mean, if you can get into a program, look, if you're targeting fellowship, you should probably look for a large institution, an academic institution with lots of opportunities. But if you don't find yourself in one, if you're in a kind of community clinic or a rural place, I told you that your skills, your competency, your professionalism, and your performance is what mostly does this. You're going to need a high step 3. Okay. You're going to need to do well on your kind of standardized exams during residency. So you're going to have to just work hard, is what I'm telling you.
Thank you, Dr. Flick. The last question we have for you today is, what if I don't match into my dream residency? What's the best next